Hello my lovelies, and welcome to the Spirit Tarot and Healing Arts YouTube channel. If you are new, welcome back. If you are a returning viewer, I'm Rin, and today's video is all about spreads that I recommend for those who are beginning their tarot practice, their tarot reading journey. So I was just aimlessly wandering through TarotTube this morning, just kind of looking at stuff, looking for stuff that piqued my interest and maybe any sort of ideas for videos for this week for the channel. And I found some videos on spreads, and I thought, I haven't done a video, at least recently, on spreads that I recommend for beginners. Now, the spreads I'm going to show you today, they are not the only spreads out there that are good for beginners by any stretch of the imagination. And if you are a beginner, you do not have to do any of these spreads. These are just ones that I like for beginners. And we're going to start out with very, very basic for those of you who are just picking up a deck for the first time, up to those of you who really are beginners, but maybe you've kind of like got a vague idea of what you are doing. And then if y'all like this video, I may do like an intermediate video later on and maybe an advanced video after that. So if you would like something like that, let me know in the comments below. Now, while I have labeled this as a video of spreads for beginners, honestly, anybody can use these spreads, whether you're a beginner, whether your skill is intermediate, or whether your skill is advanced or professional. Anybody can use these spreads, and there are a couple of the spreads that I'm going to look at today that, even though I have been reading tarot, believe it or not, for almost 30 years now, I am just shy of reading tarot for 30 years, some of these spreads I still use. Now, I've talked about this a little bit before. I talked about this in my hot takes on that whole fake tarot reader, tarot gatekeeping video of, at the point I am at in my practice, a lot of times when I'm answering questions, it's not really a spread that I use. It's more of a method that I use. But I did talk about in that video how there are spreads that I would never give up. So they're a great tool when you're starting out as a new tarot reader. Sometimes you will use spreads for your entire lifetime as a tarot reader. Sometimes you will just chuck spreads to the wind. I know tarot readers who do not use spreads at all. And then I know other readers like myself that for a lot of things I have a method, but for certain types of readings I very much do have a spread that I use. And I tend to use spreads more so with non-tarot systems. So like with the Gypsy Witch fortune-telling cards, with the Sigani Karya, with the Magar playing cards that I use. There's a Russian deck that I use. So non-tarot is where I find myself, generally speaking, leaning on spreads more and using spreads more with those. And a lot of times spreads that you can use for tarot or spreads that you can use for those will cross over. You can use them for different systems. And there are certain tarot readings that I do where I do very much use a spread even today. So again, while I have geared this video towards beginners, even if you have been reading for a long time, you may find a spread in this video that you want to give a try, and maybe it'll become part of your practice, maybe it won't. But I always encourage students to try different things and to explore and keep what works for them and leave the rest behind. So while these are just some of my suggestions, you can use them if you want, you can modify them if you want, or you don't have to use them at all. It's entirely up to you and what works best for your practice as an individual reader. Now, on the screen, what you are seeing is my little green journal. And this is my spreads journal, and I highly recommend that all readers, whether you are a beginner or advanced, have a journal just for tarot spreads that they like. Now, this is a little like pocket-sized journal. I love it because it can travel with me if I want to throw it in my purse or a backpack when I'm going somewhere that I think maybe I'll be doing some readings and maybe I want it to do some of the spreads that I have in here. This, I love it because it's like pocket sized, it's travel sized, it can go with me anywhere, and it's hardbound, so it can take a little bit of a beating if I do have it travel with me. But anytime I find a spread that I really like, and this is my like third iteration of a spread journal. I actually just recently started redoing it because I had my spreads in like 4 different journals, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm not really using anymore in my practice. So I do still have those journals around in case I ever need to dig through them for something. But this is stuff that I actually use or feel like I will continue to use in my practice. Things that I want to make sure that I can reference. And so I keep them in this little journal. I give them a title. And then usually they're pretty straightforward. I can just write, position 1, position 2, etc. for how many ever cards are in the spread. Some of them do require a little more explanation, and I will put that in this book so that, sometimes there's a spread that we love, but we just don't have an occasion to use it for a while. And a spreads journal like this is great because you will find the longer you practice tarot that things will come in and out of your practice. And so maybe like I have a Samhain spread. I only use that once a year. So, I need a memory refresher every year when I start doing that spread. Again, I need that memory refresher. And it makes it so nice to have that spread journal where I can just open up the spread journal, find the spread, refresh my memory, and start using it. So it's great for seasonal things. And sometimes too, like I said, like the Kipper Path of 7, I'm just actually flipping through my journal as I do this. I will go through phases where I do that a lot, and then I won't do it for a while. Either clients just, it goes through phases when you're a professional reader. You'll get batches or clusters of people are really into this type of reading right now, or they're really into that type of reading right now. And a reading that was really popular a week ago, maybe you won't get an order for one of those for like 6 more months. So it's just nice to have everything in there. And, maybe you get burnt out on a certain spread. So you take a break and you stop doing it for a while. And then things can become out of sight, out of mind. And then when you flip through your spreads journal, you'll be like, oh yeah, I used to do that reading. Oh, I used to love that. I want to start doing that again. So it's a great tool to have. You can look at different readings. You can see what works for you, what doesn't. My personal journal has both spreads that I have learned from others and spreads that I have created myself. In fact, the 2 that you are seeing in the journal pages here are spreads that the moon spread is my own, and then the energy center spread is one that I got the workings for it, like the base for it. I learned it somewhere random online, and then I've kind of like tweaked it and I kind of put my own spin on it. So it's not really mine. It's just my way of doing a reading that I've seen a lot of people do different takes on. So if you don't already have a journal dedicated to your tarot spreads, I highly recommend getting one, starting one. And if you're the kind of person who doesn't like a book journal like I have, you can always do this on your laptop, on your phone, on your tablet, whatever works for you as an individual. Let's start talking about actually drawing cards. Now, this first little thing that I'm going to talk about is daily draws. And I don't really consider this a spread. Most people don't. When we are talking a spread, it is a combination of cards. And most people, not all people, but a lot of people, do daily draws as a single card. And it is absolutely a fantastic exercise to do, especially when you are just starting out, or even if you're a seasoned reader but you have a brand new deck. Doing daily draws with that deck can be invaluable, but it's not really a spread per se. But I still wanted to mention it because I really feel like this is an excellent exercise. It's a great starting point for everyone. Just every day, drawing a single card from the deck and seeing what it has to tell you. Now, you could do this as a predictive reading, if that's how you want to do it, like what's in store for the day. You could ask, what do I need to know for the day? You could ask your guides or your ancestors some advice for the day. You could ask what you should focus on for the day, or could focus on for the day, that would be beneficial for you. I always like to avoid using the word should in my questions. So what could I focus on today that will help me have the best day possible and, live in alignment with who I am intended to be? You could also do your daily draw at the end of the day, asking what you could reflect on from the day to help your spiritual growth or your personal growth or your mental health or whatever it is that works for you. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. Daily draws, usually 1 to 3 cards, most often a single card for the daily draw. Again, that isn't really a spread, but it is something that I highly recommend. And you guys know me, I can't recommend journals enough. So I do recommend that you also have a journal for your daily draws. And if you want, you can have a journal just dedicated to your daily draws, but at least a journal where you can record your daily draws and any of these readings that you might try and do, so that you can go back and look at them after the fact. It is very, very helpful in learning tarot. Another thing that I recommend for beginners is to have a way to answer yes/no questions, a method or a spread that is specifically dedicated to answering yes/no questions. Now, I'm not going to go over all the different methods for that in this video. I do have a video that I'll link in the description box that goes through my yes/no maybe system that I use with tarot and playing cards for answering yes/no questions. And then in my Etsy shop, I also have a PDF that you can purchase that has all different kinds of methods for answering yes/no questions with the cards. But I do feel like that's a good thing for every reader to have in their back pocket. I've talked before about how there are limitations and drawbacks to doing yes/no questions. I even discussed that in the PDF that I have for sale, like when I feel the most appropriate times are for yes/no questions, the situations where they do have a time and place, because there are tarot readers that are absolutely anti yes/no questions. I feel like they have a time and a place, and I feel like they are a really good tool for every tarot reader to have in their back pocket. So not really spreads, but your daily draw and a way to answer yes/no questions. I think those are good starting points, good things to use as exercises to help you on your tarot journey. Now that I've said that, let's start getting into the actual spreads. I didn't mention this with the yes/no and the daily draw, where I just had a single card up on the screen. But to illustrate card placement for these, I am using the Deviant Moon Tarot Borderless Edition because I love the backs of those decks. I didn't want to have the fronts of the card showing because I don't want you to be distracted looking at the cards. I want this to just be about learning the positions of the spreads or having those available to you. So I picked a deck that I really like the backings of just to illustrate card placements in this particular video. So if you're wondering what deck these cards are from, it is the Borderless Deviant Moon Tarot. So let's start out with the famous or ubiquitous 3-card spread. And this is where you just draw 3 cards. Generally speaking, they are read from left to right. So the card on the left is 1, the card in the middle is 2, and the card on the right is 3. That is the way that they are generally read, but you do not have to. Some people will just pick whichever card they're drawn to first. And I do have now this is for playing cards, but there's a Hungarian method that I learned for playing cards where you actually read from right to left. So if, just picking a card works for you, if reading from right to left works for you for some reason, then by all means do that. But traditionally, the cards are read from left to right in a 3-card spread. And that is how I'm going to present the positions to you, because there's a lot of different meanings or placements that you can assign to these 3 cards, so that you can choose which works best for you and your practice, or which works best for your question that you're asking. So again, for the purposes of this video, I am working left to right. That is how I generally work, unless I am doing that one Hungarian reading. Otherwise, I read from left to right, and that is how I will present the positions for the 3-card spread. Now, these are just some of my favorites. There are other assignments that you can give to each placement out there, but these are just some of my favorites. So first is the tried and true past, present, future. The next one that I really like for a 3-card spread is if you're having some sort of interpersonal issue or relationship issue with someone, and that could be a romantic relationship, a friendship, any sort of platonic relationship, or a family relationship. Placement 1 is yourself, the querent. Placement 2 is the other person. And then the 3rd card is the most likely outcome of the situation, or you could do it as the 3rd card as guidance for how to proceed in the situation. But it shows where you are at, what page you're on, what page they are on, and then either the outcome, or you can do it as guidance or advice for how to handle the situation. The next one is mind, body, spirit. Material state, emotional state, spiritual state. And yes, I do have a lot of versions of the 3-card spread. The next one is issue, advice, and most likely outcome. Then another version of that could be issue, advice, and the action step recommended for you. If you want to get in touch with your spirit guides, you can use a 3-card reading. You could do yourself, a card that shows where you are, what you're thinking and feeling, what you're doing. A card that represents your guide, who is coming through to give you advice, what the characteristics are for them, or what they are a guide in regard to in your life. And then the 3rd card would be your next step or your advice from that guide. The next one is self, ancestors, and outcome, or you could also do it as self, ancestors, advice, or next step. Basically the same thing as the spirit guide one, but instead of tapping into your spirit guides, you're tapping into your ancestors. Then we have self, obstacle, and advice. So where you are, what page you are on, what you're thinking, feeling, and doing for the 1st card. Then the obstacle, what is standing in your way? What is it that you need to resolve before you can move forward? And the 3rd card being the advice for how you can resolve that obstacle, how you can remove that obstacle so that you can move forward. And then the last one, very similar to that, only instead of asking about yourself, you ask about the situation, the obstacle, and the advice. And I just want to talk for a brief moment. I know that I am a broken record on this topic. I say it all the time. I say it in my readings to my clients, but our fates are not fixed. Our future is not written in stone. So anytime when you're looking at the most likely outcome, I do word it that way, the most likely outcome. Because for me, tarot is a compass. It shows what we are going towards or what direction we are headed in if we remain on the same course we're currently on, if nothing changes. But we may want to change things, or other people may do things that could have an impact, and we're going to need to correct for that if we want to maintain our course, things like that. So remember, anytime that a card is the outcome or the most likely outcome or the potential outcome for a reading, remember that, whatever comes there, that's the course you're headed on. But that is never guaranteed. It can be very certain, but it's never guaranteed because our futures are not fixed. Our fates are not written in stone. This next spread, full transparency and disclosure, I do not use this spread with tarot. I use this for a Hungarian playing card reading. However, I think it is an excellent spread for someone who is learning how to read tarot, and it absolutely can work with the tarot just as well as it works with the Hungarian playing card readings that I do. Now, I always recommend that when someone is learning tarot, they start with fewer cards and work up, and that's why this video is sort of in the order that it is in. This is essentially at its core a past, present, future reading with a little more information. So if you like this spread, if you want to just dive into it, you feel like you're ready, go for it, right? But I recommend starting with a 3-card past, present, future first, and then going to this one. Because when we are reading tarot, whether we are using a spread or not, what we are essentially doing is weaving together a story from the cards. There should be this cohesive narrative that you are presenting in your reading. And you start to work on that by doing the past, present, future in the 3-card spread. And by weaving that into a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, then you can add more detail as we do in this past, present, future spread. Now, I don't know if I said, I just call this the past, present, future cross because it didn't really have a specific name. This is sort of a spread that I have seen many different versions of. This is exactly what I use in my Hungarian playing card readings. But again, even though I don't use it for tarot, I see it as something that a beginner could definitely get a lot of benefit and information out of. It's something that can definitely help you to start to work to pull more elements together to weave a narrative for the querent, whether that's yourself or whether you're reading for somebody else. So for this reading, we do start with a significator card, and that is the card in the center of this spread. Now, the significator card could be a card representing the querent, so yourself if you're reading for yourself, or if you're reading for somebody else, a card that represents them, or it could be a card that represents the topic that you are reading on, because you're going to ask a question, you're going to lay out the cards, and then you're going to interpret them in regard to the question that was asked. So your significator card can either represent the person or the topic of the reading. Now, there are loads of different ways to pick a court card that represents the person you are reading for. Again, that is something that is too much. It's too big of a topic for this video, but I do have a PDF available in my Etsy shop that outlines several different ways that you can use the court cards from the tarot to represent people in readings, whether that's as a significator or when the cards come up to interpret them to represent a person. I do recommend that you experiment with a bunch of different ways, decide what works best for you, and then stick with that way of identifying people through court cards. But again, if you're interested in learning about that, I do have a PDF available in my Etsy shop all about that. Once you've chosen your significator, you're going to lay it in the center of the area where you're going to be reading. Then you will shuffle the rest of the deck while concentrating on your question. Some people like to ask their question, shuffle, and have their mind clear while they shuffle. That is entirely up to you how you do that. But once you're ready to lay cards down, you lay one card above the significator, then one card to the right of the significator, one card below the significator, one card to the left of the significator. Then you will lay the next card to the left of that final card that we just placed, and then you will place a card to the far right of the spread. So the positions in the spread are very easy. You can start wherever you want in this spread, but this is how I do it. I start with the card above the significator. This card shows the querent's thoughts and plans in regard to the topic. Then I go to the card below the significator. This shows their worries or fears in regard to the topic. Then we go over to the cards to the left of the significator. Now, it depends on the reading is exactly how I interpret these two cards. You can interpret the most left card as the recent past, and then the card to the right of that, but still to the left of the significator, as the present. Sometimes I find that when I do this, they kind of blend together It's sort of like what's going on and what has like just happened. Like you're still kind of in that energy. So sometimes I do get that the leftmost card is definitely the recent past, and then the card immediately to the left of the significator, but to the right of the past, will be the present. Sometimes I find them distinctly different, and sometimes I find them very blended together. And so I just use my intuition to know what is the case in each reading. And you can dedicate that one is specifically the past, one is specifically the present, or you can do like I do where, where you feel it's appropriate, you kind of blend them together because they're not completely disconnected, if you understand what I'm saying. Sometimes what has just gone by is still very much tied into and affecting our present, and it's really hard to separate them because the events are so recent. But after you handle the past and present, the recent past and present, or if you blend that together sort of, then we're going to go to the right of the significator, and I interpret those two cards together, and those are what is coming into being or the most likely outcome for the question that the querent has asked. And again, I always preface everything with, things can change, right? Our futures are not written in stone. So keep that in mind when you are doing these readings. But the two cards to the right of the significator are the most likely outcome, what seems to be coming into being. And for me, this is always interpreted in regards of if no changes are made. If you make changes, or if somebody else is directly involved in the topic and they make a change, then that is going to have an effect on the outcome. But as things set in the very moment that you are doing the reading, those two cards are the direction you are headed in. I have seen some people interpret the card that is just immediately to the right of the significator as the sort of short-term future, so happening very, very soon, and then the card that is the most to the right being a little farther out in the future. You can do it that way. I tend not to. I tend to just do it as the two cards together as a story. And the reason I do that is because anything that has a predictive element to it, I do not like to read out past the next 90 days. Just because of the fact that our fates are not written in stone, that they're not fixed. So I don't like to read past 90 days. And for me personally, 90 days, 90 days can sound like a lot, but it really isn't. Time flies. And so I don't feel like, for me personally as a reader, I don't feel it appropriate to have like a short-term future, long-term future. I just interpret them together, but you do what works for you. But this is one of my favorite spreads. And again, I use this with my Hungarian playing cards instead of tarot, but this will work for tarot just as well. The next spread is kind of like our daily draw. These are generally called or referred to as look ahead spreads. Now, there are a lot of ones you can find. You can find spreads that will claim to look ahead for your whole life. I do not like to do those. I've experimented with a couple of them over the years. I don't like to do them because, again, our fates are not fixed. You can find ones for the year ahead. And again, I used to do those. And I used to do those professionally because there are people who love getting a year ahead spread. However, I do not do them because if people make changes, then it can completely, like, if 1, 2, 3 months in to a year, you make a significant change in your behavior or your choices or what have you, and then it can nullify the whole rest of the reading, which, that's fine and well and good in a lot of perspectives. But when somebody has paid for a reading and they make a change early on in the year, and like, it's a double-edged sword because we get these readings so that we can kind of get some guidance. And if we see that we don't like the direction we're headed in a year ahead spread, we have the power to change that. But then I also find that clients can be like, oh, yeah, I made a change, but then that meant that the rest of the year, the rest of the spread wasn't valid, and they can then not really like year ahead spreads, or they're like, well, it wasn't an accurate reading. But the point is that it was supposed to be guidance. It was supposed to be a peak so that you could set your course, and you decided you didn't like that particular trajectory. And so you changed it, which is supposed to be the point of a tarot reading. But then that invalidated the rest of the reading because they had made that choice. And so then that just kind of makes those readings seem invalid to them altogether, if that makes sense. I mean, some of us understand that that's kind of the point of them. If we didn't like what we saw in the year ahead reading and we work to change that, the whole purpose then is to invalidate the reading. But not everybody is at that place in their development, and they just perseverate on the fact that the rest of the reading became invalid, not looking at the big picture as to why. And I've had that happen. And honestly, it was one of my fears when I used to offer these readings professionally, because I knew that this was going to happen. But I did have a client who was a regular client, and they got a year ahead reading. And with this particular person, it wasn't that they didn't like the trajectory and that they consciously made a change. It was at the time they had the reading, they had said that they were committed. They had told themselves, the universe, me, that they were committed to a certain action. And then they opted not to follow through on the action. So at the time the reading was done, their intentions were set to do, let's just say, A. But then when it actually came down to it, they made the choice not to follow through on that commitment that they had made. And so then it completely changed the course of things, because the place they were at and the person they were when they had the reading was not the same person 2 months down the road, because they had completely given up on what they had committed to. And so by not following through, they essentially made a choice and changed the whole course of things. And then they were very upset because they had paid for a year ahead reading, and then none of the stuff that was in the reading came into being. And they were just not at a place on their path where they could process the fact that the whole reason the reading became invalid was because they did not follow through on the commitment and the intentions that they had when they had the reading done. And all of this is just because if you're learning tarot and you have a situation like this come up where you're using, because look ahead spreads can be a very good way to practice and learn tarot. But if you are practicing and learning tarot and you don't realize that when we do these look ahead spreads, they are very mutable. They are very changeable. And so if you go back and look at them later on and you find that, well, that didn't happen at all, is it a matter of misinterpretation? Because we all get it wrong from time to time. I don't care how long you have been reading. I don't care how good of a reader you are. Every last one of us is a human being at the end of the day, and we all get it wrong from time to time. But when you go back and look at these look ahead spreads to see if you were accurate or not, if they worked or not for you, also look at the big picture. If you go back and you look at a reading and that didn't come into being, ask yourself why. Was it the fact that you misinterpreted the reading, or was it the fact that you made a different choice and that is why you got a different outcome? So make sure that's something that you keep in mind to keep these readings in perspective, especially when you're going back and looking at them to see how you interpreted things, what came into being, what didn't, and all of that. But that said, let's talk about how to do a look ahead reading. Now, the layout that I have here on the screen is for a month ahead. So you do your daily draws, and if you do it in the morning, that's kind of the day ahead, right? But generally speaking, when we say a look ahead spread, what we're talking about is like the week ahead, the month ahead, the year ahead. It could even be the life ahead, but you've already heard my feelings on that. I like to keep it to week or month, honestly. I do not like, even for myself, I rarely do a year ahead spread. I might do one under certain circumstances. Sometimes I will make sure to do one around Samhain, the Witch's New Year, just as sort of a tradition that I do. But again, I take it with a grain of salt. It's sort of like a roadmap. I can choose to go in a different direction. So, I might do that and see what things are kind of like looking like, and see if, there are certain adjustments I want to make or certain goals that I want to make sure that I do meet. But more often than not, if I am doing a look ahead spread, whether it's for myself, whether it's for a client, I like to stick to week or month ahead. I do offer some 90-day ahead readings. Right now, as I'm recording this on my Etsy shop, I have a 90-day ahead tea leaf reading, just because I find for the tea leaf readings, the 90-day window is just a good window for me personally when I do tea leaf readings. But usually if I'm doing tarot cards or oracle cards, more often than not, I do them as a month ahead. With oracle cards, I just do one card as sort of a focus card for the month ahead, which again is not really a spread. But if I want to do a spread, if you will, for a week ahead or a month ahead, if I'm doing just a week, I usually will do 2 tarot cards for the week. And, I ask, what do I need to know about the week ahead? What do I need to be aware of? What advice does Spirit, my guides, my ancestors have for the week ahead for me? I'll shuffle the deck. I draw 2 cards for the week, and then I weave those together into a story, and that is my look ahead for the week. Now, what you see here again is the month ahead, and what I do is I, again, frame it. What do I need to know? What should I be aware of? What advice do God's guides, ancestors have for me for the month ahead? And then I draw 2 cards for each week of the month. And I know our calendar month does not jive with, the whole 28-day moon cycle and the fact that we have 7 weeks. So usually what I do is, instead of doing it by calendar month, I will do one of these readings on like a Saturday or Sunday, and I will just do it for whatever the next 4 weeks are. I don't generally go by calendar month, at least when I'm doing this for myself. I will draw 2 cards for the next upcoming 4 weeks. Now, I do not weave all 8 cards into one narrative. I weave the 2 cards for each week into a narrative for that particular week. I may find a theme, or I may find a commonality, or I may find just through observation that there is an overall narrative that goes through all 4 of those weeks or connects to each other. That may be, but when I begin doing this, I draw 2 cards for each week, and I interpret those 2 cards together to create a narrative for each week. And then I look, because some months you will find that those 4 weeks very much go together. They very much all interconnect. But sometimes you'll do this and you're at the ending of a cycle and the beginning of another. So you may have, very much week number 1 might very much be pertaining to the former cycle. Week 2 and 3 might be a transitionary period, and then week 4 is starting a new cycle, or, any variation thereof. Or maybe you're going through some things that are very short cycled, things that really only need a week to run their course. And in that case, you may find 4 very different, unconnected, unrelated things in your 4-week forecast. So I just focus by starting out looking at the 2 cards for each week, interpret those in a narrative or a story for that week. And then I can kind of look at the big picture and be like, well, are these all connected? Are these, am I going through a bunch of mini cycles? Am I, clearly is the whole 4 weeks starting out a new cycle? Is the whole 4 weeks ending an old cycle? Is the whole 4 weeks a transitionary period? Is it a combination of these things? But that's something that will just depend on where you are and what you are going through. But again, I start by interpreting each week, and then I see if there is a narrative to be weaved from all 4 weeks together, or a couple of the weeks together. So do what feels right for you. So the last spread that I have for you that we're actually going to go into in detail is what I call a decision-making spread. This is not anything unique. This is just one of the many versions of decision-making spreads out there. This is for any time when you're trying to decide between two things. So pictured for you, I have what I consider probably the most basic version of this spread. You start with the center card on the bottom. That is your significator card. In this particular sense, I personally never pick a card to represent the querent in this decision-making spread. I will pick a card for what the topic is. So if they are wanting to, I don't know, make a decision between two different dating apps, let's say, should they use Tinder or should they use Hinge? Let's take that as our sample here. That's going to be our sample. We have a querent that wants to know, should they use Tinder? Should they use Hinge? You could take, we'll make this super easy. We're not going to get complex here because there's other cards we could use. But let's just say we take the Lovers because this is a love-themed topic. We're trying to find our partner, our union. And so we'll just use the Lovers for the significator. Now, before we lay out any other cards, we're going to dictate the left side of this spread is going to be Tinder and the right side will be, if we choose, Hinge. So what I do then is, you can see how we start down at the bottom of the significator and then cards go up the left and up the right. I start by laying that first card above the significator on the left. Then I lay its mirror over to the right. Then I lay the card above that first card on the left, mirror it over on the right, and then I do a third card above that. For this particular example, I kind of laid them back towards the center just because it was easier to photograph that way. But you can lay them out however you want, honestly. So just like we laid the cards down, mirrored, at this point though, I do tend to read the choice to the left, in this case, the Tinder line, and then I read the line to the right. In this case, that would be the Hinge line. So the very first card we laid down on each side, because the positions on each side do mirror, but I go through the left first. We have the pro of choosing Tinder, then the con of choosing Tinder, and then the most likely outcome if we choose Tinder. Then I go over and look at the line going up the right. That would be the pro of choosing Hinge, the con of choosing Hinge, and then the most likely outcome of choosing Hinge. Now, again, you can do this for whatever two things you are comparing. I'm just throwing out an example so that we have something here. Now, keep in mind, this spread is not telling you which to choose. It is giving you information so that you can make an empowered decision as to what choice is best for you. This is a tool to help you organize your thoughts, feelings, beliefs, desires, all of that, in order to help you make an empowered decision. The purpose of this spread is not for the cards to make the decision for you. Remember, as I always say, the cards are not the boss of you. But this gives you a way to sort of compare the two choices and decide what you feel is in your best interest. Now, you can also add an additional card to each line. Again, I didn't lay this card in the spread because in the very basic form that I have seen this in, these are the topics that are included usually, most frequently, and just space on my table and being able to take a photo for the purpose of a YouTube video. I just did the very basic, but you could also add an additional card to each line that is maybe advice from Spirit about each choice, or guidance from Spirit about each choice, or you could have that be guidance from your spirit guides or your ancestors or your gods, whatever you like to connect with, whatever you like to work with. You could ask for an advice card for each decision as well. That is entirely up to you. It'll also partially depend too, because like I said, when you are learning, you don't want to overwhelm yourself with cards and information. So add that if you feel like you're ready for it and it'll be helpful for you, but you don't have to put it in if that feels like too many cards in the spread for you at this point in time on your tarot learning journey. But I want you to know that it's an option that you can add if you feel like you're ready, or if you feel like you need that information in your reading to help you make the decision. Another note, let's say that you are trying to decide, let's say there's a person in your life, right? And it doesn't matter whether it's platonic, romantic, family. Let's say there's a person in your life and you're having a difficult time with that person, and you have, let's say you see yourself as having two options in regards to that person, right? Let's just say, to keep this simple and straightforward, right? Do you stick around and try to work the situation out, or is it time for you to just cut your losses and run? Which is in your best interest? Trying to work out the difficulties, or is this a situation where what is best is to walk away? Now, where I said that I do not pick a significator that represents the querent, in that particular case, I would pick a significator card that represents the target. Now, we could get into a whole thing about third-party readings. We're not going to go there in this video because I do not consider this a third-party reading. The reading is about the querent and which choice, trying to work it out or walking away, is best for the querent. But it's about an interpersonal relationship, and it's about the relationship with that other person. And so I choose a significator card to represent that other person. But I am not actually reading on that other person. So if you have a whole third-party hang-up, we can discuss third-party readings some other time. This video is not the place for that, but I do not view this as a third-party reading because I am not reading for that other person who is not involved in the reading. I am doing the reading on what is best for the person who is getting the reading, but we can't not have the person that, you know, is in the interpersonal relationship who's not getting the reading. We can't just exclude them from the reading and do a reading on how that relationship is affecting the querent. It's just physically impossible. So, not a third-party reading, but if there's a situation like that, in that particular case, I would choose a significator that represents that other party. But that's just how I would choose to do it. There are other significator cards you could choose. If it's a family member, maybe the 10 of Pentacles, because that can deal with family issues. If it's a romantic partner, depending on what kind of relationship romantically they have, maybe the Two of Cups might be the card you could choose, because that can be about engagement and connection and coupling as well. There's different options. You could also, again, choose the Lovers if it's someone you're in a romantic relationship. But if it's a business partnership, you could pick the Two of Wands, because for me, that card can often, it means partnership for me in a lot of regards, but specifically, I know this is not a traditional meaning, or at least I don't think it is, but I have found a lot of times in my readings, business partners will show up as the Two of Wands for me personally. And you will find that as a tarot reader, sometimes you will just have cards that mean a certain thing for you. Other readers don't read or interpret the card that way. But if you find that that's consistently coming up for you a certain way, then just run with that. I really don't know if I've seen anybody else have the Two of Wands represent business partners for them, but I have consistently found that to be the case for me in my own reading. So, you know, you can do that too. If there's a significator that you're just like, traditionally this doesn't really fit, but for me, I just feel like this is the right card for it, then go with that. All right, now those are the spreads that I wanted to look at and explain. This is sort of the honorable mention section. One of the spreads, and again, start with the spreads we've gone over first, is my recommendation. But the Celtic Cross spread, I don't know a lot of people, and I say this all the time, I'll come across one or two readers who use the Celtic cross spread. That is actually what they use to do readings. But I find that to be the exception to the rule. However, it is a very historic tarot reading. It is important to the history of tarot, in my personal opinion. Don't come for me if you don't agree. That's fine if you don't agree. But in my personal opinion, the Celtic cross spread has a historical significance. And I think that once you've mastered like some 3-card spreads and maybe some 5-card spreads, then maybe break out the Celtic cross, and you by no means have to stick with it. But I think that it's a good thing for every tarot reader to at least read up on, to at least try. And then, feel free. I do not use the Celtic cross spread ever. I learned it when I was first learning tarot, and I'm glad that I did. I don't regret it by any stretch of the imagination. But it is not a spread I ever use. And to be perfectly honest, the only people that I personally know who use the Celtic cross spread happen to be persons who are male. And I don't know why. I do not personally, and I know that there are female tarot readers out there that use the Celtic cross spread. I'm not saying that there aren't. My personal experience, though, of the readers that I interact with, the only ones who I personally know who use the Celtic cross in their professional readings for clients happen to be male. And I don't know if that is an overall trend or if that is just the types of tarot readers that I tend to interact with in my circle. I do not know. I don't want to make a generality. It's just something that I have noticed. But I think that it is an important spread for everyone to at least read up on, to at least give a try to it and see what they think about it. But I think there are far better spreads out there, honestly. So I do not use that spread, but I do think it is a good spread to at least have some experience with. Another one that I do not use, but I kind of feel like everyone should at least read up on, be familiar with, give a try to, is the horseshoe spread. I did for a while when I was first learning. Remember, this was in the mid-90s, so I didn't have a lot of access to different tarot information and materials, didn't have a lot of access to a variety of spreads. And so I did use the Celtic cross. I had access to the horseshoe spread very early on. I did read up on it. I did try it. I played with it for a while, practiced it for a while. It just never stuck with me. Once I learned other spreads other than the Celtic cross, I very quickly abandoned the Celtic cross once I had access to other resources that taught me differing spreads. But despite the fact that I don't find those spreads useful in my personal practice, despite the fact that I have given up the Celtic cross long ago, and that I never really used the horseshoe, other than just to try it out and experiment with it and learn it and learn tarot in general, I still think that they deserve an honorable mention here, because I think once you do start to work on bigger spreads, I feel like they have such a big place in tarot history that everybody should at least be familiar with them. Whether or not you use them is entirely up to you. But I feel like everybody should at least know what they are. That is, again, though, my personal opinion. No one has to go and read up on them or learn them or give them a try. Free will is all yours. Do what you want. I just throw it out there because I think that they are a good thing to at least be familiar with, or at least understand what they are, because they were so prevalent in tarot history. So those are the spreads I have for you today, along with my honorable mentions that are really just, part of tarot history that I think everybody should at least, have a clue about. If you've enjoyed this, let me know. If you would like me to do videos sort of building off of this, where I go into maybe more intermediate tarot spreads and maybe even do one that's more advanced, let me know, because I could, sort of go through my spreads and that and see what would fit the bill, and maybe go over those two different categories of spreads as well, to give you guys some more to work with. But let me know what you think. If you have any questions, leave them down below because I'm always happy to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel because it helps out so much. But until I see you again, blessings to you wherever your journey finds you.